Weekly, and we're the partners of Solarian Games.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Peter. And this week we're joined by Flint, Dille and Tim, Brannon. And this week's stories, Tales of the Chitin Age, a new...
This is your story. You should know how to pronounce it.
I know. I practiced this word and I got it wrong anyway. Yeah. Tales of the Chitin Age, a new RPG on Kickstarter. D&D's Chris Perkins promoted to creative director. 6 new made in Italy. I don't know why it's in quotes, but it was role-playing volumes for English release. Discworld passes $2 million. There is quick start rules available now. And we'll wrap up tonight with a discussion about Agent 13 and TSR's never released R.I.P. RPG, which interestingly are tied together somehow, but you'll have to stay tuned to find out. All right, so our first story is Tales of the Chitin Age. Now, this was interesting. I came across it and it just I got hooked in immediately on the picture. And then I started looking at it and I was like, wow, this sounds like a really fun game. I mean, again, we don't primarily focus on Kickstarters at all. We don't want to make it like a major part of the show or anything, but every once in a while you see one, and you're just kind of like, oh, that's really cool. I want to talk about it. So this, it's a world that takes place way in the future, like 1,000 years in the future, where the world has fallen apart, it's been apocalypse and everything, nature's been changed through toxic gases and stuff. And it's swords, shields, and giant bugs. So I don't know, it looked cool. It looked really cool.
That is the future we are facing.
Right. The only thing it's going to be live left is, what is it? What they say? A rat sitting on a rock eating a roach.
and having a Twinkie for dessert.
Right. So in this world, the dominant species are insects. The climate has become extreme, and even the most northern lands expect tropical storms between harsh winters. Lots of vegetation and jungle-like stuff, and humans still walk the earth, but this is pretty cool. They have been mutated and changed over time. And then there's 4 types. They had this neotype, metamorph, telempath, which I thought was kind of an interesting way to spell that.
Yeah.
And the insectile.
I like the look of this. It seems like it's got sort of I don't know if you can call anything in the 1970s to be pulp, but I'm going to use that word anyway.
Sure,
feels like that sort of 70s B-movie sci-fi.
Right. It's sort of a Thundar. Remember Thundar? It's sort of a Thundar feel to it.
I think 70s or earlier, it was really good to use insects as your giant things, because that way you could just film the insect up close.
Yeah, right. with a green screen.
I don't know. It's kind of giving me there was a I think it was like a Saturday morning live action show where they went around in a big sort of futuristic looking RV. And did anybody help me on this one?
That wasn't Logan's Run, was it?
No, Logan's Run's great. This is not as great.
This was Arc 2.
Yeah, Tim got it. Arc 2.
Arc 2. I remember that. Okay, yeah.
Because Flint, okay, were you working and were you writing in television and movies around the time that came out?
Well, yeah. Actually, note that I haven't heard about it. What was funny is Thundar was. I was working at the studio that did it. After they did it, it was Ruby Spears and Joe Ruby and Steve Gerber, who we'll talk about this later on. He wrote this R.I.P. just to connect it into this conversation. Created that, and I was a Ruby Spears, and I was doing when I got there. It was mostly probably the biggest thing I did there was Mr. T, if you remember that show.
Oh shit. Yeah. That's awesome.
Okay, I have to ask.
Yeah, I remember Mr. T, I Pity the Fool. Except we couldn't say I Pity the Fool. We had a kinder, gentler Mr. T.
Oh, okay. I have to ask you because, when I worked in marketing, I worked with a bunch of cool properties, but we never really spent any time with the actual stars and talent. Did you get to hang out with Mr. T at all?
I never once hung out with Mr. T. It had a live action wraparound. Okay, and people would tell me what the recording was like, but I wasn't there. I didn't write Mr. T in dialect or anything like that. I wrote him like he was William Buckley, yeah, because that was an interesting one because the show would wrap around with the moral of the story in it.
Of course.
Right.
And for our listeners, I think most of our listeners are going to know who Flint Dille is, but I'm not going to give your whole resume here. But I think one of the things people are going to most recognize is that you is this fair to say that you co-created the D&D cartoon?
No. That was no. I had nothing to do with the D&D.
You had nothing to do with it, so it's unfair to say what I said.
But Gary, yeah, definitely, yeah. I mean, Gary and Dennis Marks, who was the showrunner on it and story editor, and I used to sit around at the D&D mansion reading the scripts. I mean, I could do that and help, and we'd be throwing out lines. But I was at Ruby Spears through one part of it. And I think I was either at Lucasfilm or Sunbow, for the rest of it. So there's never a moment I could have done a D&D cartoon.
Could I characterize it better by saying that you helped Gary Gygax navigate the world of entertainment?
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say. We went on a ledge. Well, now bear in mind, I'm at that point like 2 years out of film school, and so it's not like I was exactly the Shackleton of expertise on the entertainment world.
Could you at least have been the Tenzing Norgay?
We went a lot. We went on a lot of adventures. Let me put it that way.
I'll bet.
Cool. All right, going to the next story.
Yes.
This is a short one, but just a follow up. We spoke, I believe, either last week or the week before about D&D's Chris Perkins leaving his role as the game design architect, essentially head of D&D, and we were speculating a little bit on what that meant and where he was going. We said at the time that we hoped that it meant he was getting a promotion, and that is exactly what happened. He has moved up to creative director, and that is the role that Mike Merles held up until about 2018 before moving over to where he is now with Magic the Gathering. And Chris clarified this on Twitter by saying that he had been previously, his title was game design architect as head of D&D, and now he's the creative director, which in his words is a more behind the scenes gig that lets me play quietly in a bunch of different sandboxes. So congratulations, Chris Perkins.
Right. Nice. So he wasn't fired, he was promoted.
Quite the opposite. Yes.
Right. Excellent. Good news.
Yep.
All right. Our next story. There's 6 new made in Italy role-playing volumes for English release. And these are by Ares Games. And, initially they were Italian games, and I guess they re-released them in English versions, and they look really cool. The reason why I wanted to put this one in our feed was just because of the games they have in it, which I thought were really neat. So they have.
Can you share the screen? Because when I saw the picture that you put in the notes, I thought you made a mistake. I was like, what did you put in here? This is not a game.
All right, hold on.
I honestly thought you just grabbed some sort of screenshot, or this was the picture that came with the frame.
All right,
we're looking at, for people who are listening on the audio later, this to me looks like a brochure for a nursing home. And it looks very much like the kind that your PowerPoint might automatically do. And that's very intentional, I think. Right?
Yes. Yeah. I think this is what it was for. Now, let's see. Let me blow this up a little bit bigger on the screen so you can. Oh man.
I think we can see it pretty well.
All right. Anyway, well, down here where you see my little cursor moving, it says a role-playing game by Roberto Di Luca. So it's awesome. This is really, honestly, this is what attracted me to this article. So I just thought that was super cool that they have a game where you can do that. But you're basically, in that game, in this one, the Green Oaks game, it's a narrative-driven game where players take on the roles of elderly residents in a mysterious, rumor-laden retirement home. And so I'm going to do a little tie-in on me here. So, a friend of ours, Steve Wallet, who has a game called a company a movie company called Nerdy Productions, or Nerdy Dog. I think it's Nerdy Dog Productions. He actually did a movie during the pandemic. It was like kind of halfway through the pandemic, and man, was that something he had to navigate. But and it was about an old age home where the people who live there are all old, not all of them, but this group were old D&D players. And so they'd go down in the basement and they would play D&D, and there was some kind of demonic possession going on in the house that they had to overcome. So it was kind of neat. It all came from a conversation we had when we were younger. We said, yeah, when we all get old and we retire and we're in a nursing home, we should all go to the same home so we can play D&D all the time. And then we would always joke about how we would forget what we were doing. So anyway, so that just kind of what turned me on to it. I thought it was awesome. And then there's another one. Then there's another one, 5 Days, which is centered on it says centered on character-driven storytelling. I don't know what that means. And Last Resort is a cooperative game where you're playing against you're on a tropic island fighting zombies. And then the other 3 are just they're just different things. Like one is I think for a Cthulhu type thing. The other one is an art book, and the last one is Forsaken Scriptures, has maps. Oh, just maps and stuff for fantasy RPGs.
Oh, cool.
So these are some folks from Italy.
Yeah. And it's cool because I don't think a lot of people realize that Italy actually has a really big RPG scene.
Oh yeah.
When I was working this one online convention, there was a couple gamers that I interviewed, couple game designers I interviewed that were from Italy, and we talked quite a bit about like the role playing industry in Italy, and it's actually pretty decent.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we so I will just say, longtime friend of the company's, Frank Menser, spends a lot of time in Italy every year now because he's big star over there. So
oh wow.
They love his stuff, and so I don't know if he's actually learned Italian yet, but I know he gets over there.
Like they say, he's big in Italy, huh?
Yeah, exactly. All right, moving on to the last story before we get to the main event. This is going to be, I think, the 3rd time that I've come on here talking about the Discworld game, but deal with it. Let's just put it this way. I'm looking over here right now at my Terry Pratchett shelves, and I realize that there's probably 4 books that he's ever published that I don't have on those shelves. So I'm just going to go on about it. That's just the way
that you might like. You might be a fan.
Might be a fan. At any rate, they are down to about 3 days to go with their Kickstarter, so they don't need any help from us. So I don't think we're out there promoting things unethically. As of 7:30, when I looked last, they were at $2.2 million. Well, $2,265,770. Pretty good. And the quick start rules are now available for free to download at Modifius. Last time we talked about, they had done a live play. We got a little bit of a flavor of it, so I thought I would just tell what I've learned from reading the quick start rules, and exactly what sort of game it is that we're talking about now, because you had asked some questions about that, Peter.
Yes.
All right. So first of all, their quick start is 48 pages long. So hey, come on, we do a 2-page quick start, okay? For Top Secret.
It's a semi-quick start.
Yeah, but it actually, to be fair, most of that is the introductory adventure, and it's a very cool adventure. It comes with a starter adventure called Up in Smoke, which is set at, if anybody knows Discworld very well, you might know Lady Sybil Rampkin and her Sunshine Sanctuary for Sick Dragons. I don't know, are either of our guests, Timothy or Flintothy, are either of you Discworld fans at all?
A casual fan. That's about all.
Okay.
Well, I have a lot more. It's a lot of reading. I spend most of my time with horror.
Oh, cool. Well, one of the main characters, or one of the characters in the book, is an aristocratic woman named Lady Sybil. And just like you might have an aristocrat running a home for sick horses, she runs a home for sick dragons.
Oh, good.
In this case, swamp dragons. Very small, can't really hurt you, except they could burn your house down when they burp. But basically, so the system is pretty simple. The character sheets themselves have no stats at all. Instead, what they have is, and I can actually blow this up a little bit here to see if we want to share. You know what? Let me share my screen, and I've got a whole thing here. I'll just go ahead and do that once I figure out how to do it. There we go. Maybe I won't, because it's all sorts of complicated. I won't. I'll just describe it. Okay, so essentially the character sheets themselves are just a list of things about your character. And these are all traits. So you have your name, your organization. So maybe you're part of the Watch or the Thieves Guild or something like that. Your background. So in this case, I'll read off Constable Cliff. His organization is the Watch. His background is a troll raised by loving human parents. His niche is public relations, and he's the face of the group. At core, people aren't things. Quirks, a winning smile, and chiseled features, simple but not stupid. Now, all of those are traits, and none of them have numbers. And here's the way the game is basically played. When you want to do something, you evoke or invoke the trait that you're going to use. So he might invoke something like the fact that he was raised by loving human parents. So if he needs to talk to somebody who he has to convince of things, he could say, I've got a great love for humans. I understand them well. Therefore, I should get a nice big die to roll. And the better you can convince the referee or the GM, the bigger your dice is going to be, between a D4 and a D12. And so let's say he gets a D10 because he just explains it so well. The GM always gets a D8, and that's called the narrativium die, because on Discworld, everything is driven by the power of story. And that's kind of the general idea behind this game, is that there's two main core premises. Number one, the disc has a story it wants to tell, and if left alone, it will spin much as it always has done. Number two, the players want to change this story to one that's more to their liking. So you're always sort of fighting against the story. And that's really the whole rule set. So it looks incredibly simple to play, and it definitely looks like something where you have to have sort of a love of storytelling, maybe a little bit of improv, and very storytelling type of game, which I think is appropriate for the Discworld.
Cool.
Yeah.
So still very excited to get this game in my hands and to annoy everyone I know until they play it.
So I'm assuming you're back in this one.
Oh, I bought the big old. Yeah. I think they're sending me a real life-size troll.
Right. I think you get like a little piece of Terry Pratchett's bone or something. Maybe,
you know, it's funny because if you play Top Secret, we keep it relatively fast and easy to learn. But if you find the parts that are really crunchy, that's usually something I wrote, because I love my tables and my rules and my simulation.
Yep.
Yet I'm super excited about this game that has no numbers for the traits. Go for it.
Hey, we are we are Legion, right?
Yes, I am Legion. I contain multitudes.
There you go.
And speaking of multitudes, let's get to our multitudes, because we've got some multitudes here today.
Yeah.
All
right. So we invited Tim and Flint on today because Tim has written a couple of articles that frankly blew my mind. I thought I knew everything. Look at me thinking I'm so smart. Turns out I'm not. There's an entire part of TSR history that I had no idea about, an entire game that I never even knew was conceived of. And it turns out we've got the person who conceived of it right here with us tonight.
Yeah. You are asking about one of the more obscure and I wouldn't say disgraceful, that's not quite the right word, but unremembered periods of my career. There was the comic modules as R.I.P, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
Okay, so I guess we'll all talk about Agent 13, which I have a slightly different feeling about. But so I actually dredged one of these things up. And should I go into what a comic module is?
Yes. Yeah, and tell people what they're looking at, because we're going to have some people listening on audio tomorrow and for anybody listening,
you guys are free to tell me, hey, you're getting really boring, so don't talk anymore about this. Okay, so what you will see here is that we have this hexagonal thing in there because we had game content in there. We thought that was a really clever, it's my fault, really. I can't blame someone else. But that was a really clever way to say we had game material in there. And we would have R.I.P. was one of our lines. Brasher was a series that went into R.I.P. Done by Steve Gerber, who, as you mentioned before, did Thundar the Barbarian with Joe Ruby at Ruby Spears. So then you open it up and you get, me being Stan Lee in the front of it. And then you get the Brasher story. Then you get game content. Oh, then you get a B story. I always like the B stories in comics, but because I found them more interesting than the A stories a lot of times. Which would be, another story. Sometimes it was a series, sometimes just a one-off.
Right.
Then you get, I can never move things right on a screen because it's backwards.
Yeah,
then you get role-playing content, and this was role-playing that I think was designed to be played with, I might be lying to you, the Top Secret
Yes.
role-playing system. Do not trust me on that. But we were setting up for what would have been the R.I.P. role-playing game. Then you have
I
a
keep
B
popping
story.
off on it. Give me 1 second here. All right, here you go. Hold yours
Oh,
up,
here we go.
Tim.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and I'll confirm your memory.
Right.
Yeah, it is for Top Secret. This is the R.I.P. comic issue 1 of the first series. There were 2 series of 4 comics each.
And hey, for the audio listeners, it said on the page that RIP stands for Role Play in Peace.
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll hold it
Yeah.
up a bit. I'm trying to, and I apologize for my sort of sketchy looking camera here.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal.
But yeah, so it was 1990, and horror games were very popular. And there was this notion in these comics to start with. I think this comic was out in 87 to start
No,
with.
91, I think.
91, 19. Okay, no, this one was 1990.
Okay.
And there was something that was out in 87. I'll dig that back up. But I mean, this has got your fingerprints all over it. So it's
Yes, it does.
yes. So it's
does.
got
It's
everything
been-
that yeah. But
excuse
the
me,
point
sorry.
is that you had the comics and it had your A story, your B story, which continued. The A story was throughout the first 4 issues, and then the next 4 issues had a different one. It gave us different levels of role play notes to use with the Top Secret SI game. And I'm sort of starting in the middle and working my way around. I guess one of the things, and I mentioned this in in the series that I did, I call it my in search of, where I go in and I dig around to try to find some really super obscure topic and see how much I can, dig up on it. And I've been spending,
You hit gold this week.
What's that? Yeah.
You hit gold this week.
Yeah, and I'd been picking at this one for a while, to be honest with you. And I knew that I was going to probably put it out on Halloween because that seems appropriate. And that's usually when I get quite a few eyes on my site. But the whole deal is there was this game, and we saw ads for it, and it appeared in a TSR catalog for R.I.P. horror role playing. Well, at the time, 1990, I was sophomore, junior in college. And I was like, oh man, this is great. This is exactly the sort of stuff I love. And I was playing Chill. I was, I knew of.
Yeah, I remember Chill. Yeah.
Oh, I love Chill. Chill was, and Chill, they're local guys too. This was the second edition Chill. So that was Mayfair. That was out in Niles. And I'm pointing in that direction. Like
an amazing amount of role playing came out of the Midwest for reasons.
Oh, it did. It really did. I'm shocked by it. And I do the digging.
As a fellow Midwesterner, my theory is that it's kind of a boring place.
Also you had long, cold winters where you were inside.
Yeah, it's cold, and you got to do something when it's cold.
Yeah. Indoor sports.
That's right.
And Lake Geneva was extreme that way, but yes.
Yeah. So the R.I.P. game, the R.I.P. game, it was something that has bubbled up every so often. Somebody mentions, oh, did anybody ever see this? Or what do you know about this game? Especially if you spend any time in like horror role-playing game communities. So, I mean, I remember seeing it back in the 90s, and then it came up again with a bunch of us or a bunch of us who were all working on the, at the time, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer game.
Right.
And we talked about that, like, oh man, I wonder if enough of this existed if we could try it out, because we were all fans of Cult and Chill and Call of Cthulhu while we were writing this stuff.
Right.
And then of course that would ebb out, and then it started popping up again, especially in the the old school Chill community. Yeah, see, these are the ads.
Yeah, right. I always loved that cover, by the way. Yeah,
The cover's great. The only problem is from what I can tell, it looks like somebody put it together very, very hastily.
Well,
With
okay,
the
I'm going
cover?
to keep being the voice of the advocate for the audio listeners.
Right.
Oh,
Flint,
there's a
Flint,
picture
do
of
you
a
want to
vampire
describe the
girl.
cover for us?
Sure. So the first cover, let me pull up mine so I can see it a little bit. So the
And this
first
is
cover
Tim
is,
talking
you've
now.
got this. It's the same R.I.P. logo that you see on the comics, and it says modern day horror role playing system, and it's got Scott Herring, Jim Ward, and Paul Lindbergh. The only problem is with this is they misspelled Scott Herring's and Paul Lindbergh's name. Now they are spelled correctly in the comics. So, and I'm holding up this one because the second supplement shares the same image as the second comic. It could have been
That's
done for
an
just
image. What we're
placeholder.
seeing is a woman, maybe kind of vampiric. Well, definitely vampiric.
Yeah,
looking.
she's
She's got
definitely
fangs.
vampire.
Yeah, she's
You
got
have a-
fangs, blood
She's got
dripping out
fangs,
of her
blood.
mouth.
Yeah,
Kind of a weird, misty blue eye look. Yeah.
Yeah,
She's
yeah,
doing
this-
that whole kind of sexy vampire thing that happened in
I
the
always
90s.
like that first cover
Yeah.
with the guy being buried, but they cut off. You lost the joke on it that there's a guy under the ground fighting his way out of his coffin, coming out.
Oh yeah, there you
You
go.
know,
You can see it on that one.
Yeah. No, that was it was the image you just had before. That was the role playing.
the role, the RPG.
Cover, yeah.
Right. So that's, I think, as far as I can tell with that, and unfortunately, Jim Ward passed, and
Yeah.
Lindbergh is also gone, and I'd spoken to Jim Ward quite a
Paul
bit.
Lindbergh died? I was unaware of that.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago, or fairly recently, and of course, Jim Ward died right before Gary Kahn.
Big Gary Kahn this year because I saw him Gary Kahn last year. I mean, they had lunch with him and his son and all that.
Yeah, and
Very sad.
I was
Yeah.
working I was sharing a booth with Troll Lord Games with my company at the time, still my company though. And I talked to Jim Ward quite a bit there, and I wish I had been thinking about this at the time because I would have asked him some questions about it, because he had later went on to do Tainted Lands with
Is
Troll
Scott
Lord.
Herring still alive, isn't he?
He is.
Yeah.
and
Okay. He would probably know the most.
Yeah, I
would be
reached
my
out.
guess.
I reached out to him on Facebook, but he didn't
Well,
get back to me. But
Let
then
me
again,
interrupt then for a moment, Tim,
Sure.
because I think we're starting to get into some things that maybe I certainly don't know. Maybe we can back up for a little background here.
Sure.
So, Flint, could you give us some background on when, like, were the comics your idea? Could you tell us kind of like the genesis of this, how it came about, and how you were involved?
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of things all kind of came together at the same time. My sister had bought Lorraine Williams had bought TSR.
Right.
And we wanted to do, and it felt like a good idea to do comics. And my theory was that TSR couldn't, just forever. I'm totally wrong about this, by the way, but TSR couldn't exist forever doing nothing but D&D. And they had, they'd done, Boot Hills and Gangbusters and, bunch of other role playing games. But I felt like they'd ought to have multiple worlds. It ought to be like Disneyland for role playing games. Okay?
Logical thought at the time.
And as it happened, our grandfather created Buck Rogers, and we had the rights to that. And it had been a while since the old Gil Gerard, Aaron Gray show.
Right.
And we figured, we had to bring that back. And we did a lot of different Buck Rogers stuff. So we'll make that one of the comics. Mm-hmm. So we felt like, okay, the genres we wanted to take, we could not do anything D&D or Sword and Sorcery related because they had to deal with Marvel.
Right.
And Marvel was really deeply upset about the fact that we were this Marvel comics. Yeah, that we were doing comics, and it's like, guys, we're doing genres you don't touch. Okay, don't worry about this. Right. This is little game world comic stuff. So and it felt like, well, it's TSR, so we had to have game content. We also had games you could cut out of the comic and play. I had this idea that people would buy more copies if they had to mutilate the copy.
I was just going to say that is.
Oh, that's a good idea.
But for you people find I have an intact version of R.I.P. There we go. Yeah, that was
again, Tim?
game. That we demoed that one at Comic-Con back when Comic-Con was really Comic-Con, and that was great. That was really fun. I think that was one.
Well,
so the comic came about that way, but then how did you pivot from comic to game?
Well, I mean, we felt that because it was a TSR comic, it ought to have game content in it, right? Because TSR at its core is a game company, right? So we decided, and then we ought to do role playing. But then I thought, well, let's have a game, kind of a game. And Paul, and Scott designed these things effortlessly, or so it seemed.
Yeah.
Let's have a kind of a game in there that you can just play, inside the comic book. You can do it right there. It doesn't have to be an RPG, because we knew, like, for even like R.I.P, we knew we're sort of retrofitting it onto the back of Top Secret, which kind of horror espionage. I like that genre, but so that was the concept there. So we had a lot of different stuff. So you'd buy it and get a bunch of stuff in there.
So was Doug Niles involved at that point, because he was the one behind the SI rules, or
Doug Niles? I don't remember. He was busy doing stuff there. I remember him working later on I think it was on Line in the Sand, which was an actual military simulation game we did. It was a Gulf War
Gulf
game
War
that came
one.
out the day the Gulf War launched. And I think he'd done the Clancy rules. I may be totally wrong about that, but
that sounds right, because he's kind of moved on to become a very good novelist, focusing on military type noveling. Noveling?
Yeah,
he's noveling.
Yes.
Sort of Tom Clancy, kind of Larry Bond kind of country.
Yeah.
Which is a rich world to be in. And one thing that was amazing about the guys at TSR, just as sort of an aside, is they could, any one of them, like, oh, I'll go write a novel, and like Warren Spector writing novels, and then Ward's writing novels, and we're doing role playing games, because those immediately saw the link between writing a book and interactive storytelling, role playing storytelling, that they're really kind of the same thing. But anyway, sorry, I got distracted from my distraction. So Niles would be a person to talk to. I'm afraid to ask anybody. And
he's doing fine. Doug's doing fine. We still talk to him. So we actually are getting ready to publish some new top secret stuff by Doug Niles. So he's doing great.
Oh, that's great. That's good. Yeah, because Top Secret, that was, if I have a genre that, I just gravitate effortlessly to, it's probably espionage. And that's because that's the other thing we're going to talk about today is Agent 13, which was also done in Top Secret SI.
That's right. Yeah, that was the whole Agent 13 supplement.
Yes.
Then it connected to the stuff that Scott was writing in the comics. Because there's every comic had, this is what you need to do in Top Secret SI to expand this into the horror. And honestly, I mentioned in part 2 of the series, where I try to give a practical example, is there enough here to run an entire game? Probably not. But take Top Secret, take Agent 13, take the R.I.P comics, put them all together, and you definitely have enough to get you started.
It's a good question. Here's what we got. There is an Agent 13 module.
Yes.
That let's see, where is it?
I had to borrow one from a friend to do.
Well, here's my Top Secret, but I don't see my module here. But I have a copy of the Agent 13 module.
And that was always so cool, because it had that sort of mummy-looking guy on the front.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was interesting.
Like, because Agent 13 was so kind of horror espionage to begin with. It was
it was Illuminati before we started.
Monsters from the center of the earth, and which is that's sort of what I'm doing right now. Oddly enough, it's a little.
What do you mean? We need to know more.
Marconi and I are always trying to come up with the next Agent 13, and the third book, which was, is it okay if we segue to that for a second? I'll bring it back to the comic module.
Cool.
The third book of Agent 13, it was supposed to be Overlords of the Underworld. And Overlords of the Underworld, because I'd done a TV show that I kind of had unfinished business with called Inhumanoids. That was one of, when I was working with Sunbow, we did Transformers and G.I. Joe and Humanoids and Visionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I always, my thought was always that these genres just kind of all melt into each other. And this is one of the few, mediums in which you can do. In movie business, you call it a hat on a hat. Like if you have a vampire western or
I've never heard that phrase before.
What?
I've never heard that phrase before. I'm not.
Yeah. That's people say the movie's a hat on a hat, and like hat on a hat works. Nice. But it's a lot of movies. You get a hat on a hat on a hat. That's to me hat. But anyway, so so Agent 13 could go espionage one way. I mean, what it really here are the covers. Here is the cover of the first graphic novel, and then here is the second graphic novel. It's a slightly different thing, for it. But you can see, and then here's a guy did a compiled of the 3 regular novels.
Right.
That was a different.
That's the one I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You got a little bit of Monster. You got a little bit of Secret Society. I mean, this is just all the stuff I love, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And for me, I mean, to me, it's just different mediums. Because remember, I'd been doing all these toy shows so we're turning toys into cartoons, and the games and movies and TV shows, and especially RPGs, but also even strategy games are all just kind of fungible. They all just move into each other and feed each other, right? And that's I still believe that. I mean, it's hard for me to work on something that isn't just like one thing. And a lot of times you can leverage a brand, to get a whole new kind of gameplay going. And we did that like Pokemon Go. All of a sudden you have games where people are walking outside and playing. That was much later in my career, but it's to most people that was a new kind of gameplay. So anyway, and I never get far from secret societies and monsters and horrors. I mean, it's just. Yeah, that's like second nature. And of course, D&D, I mean, which is, what's that, monsters and all that. I always wanted to do a D&D spy movie, or even just like a, procedural mystery with D&D. But I just don't know enough to do that. But I'd love to see that show. You just have, or whatever. And anyway.
So you say you saw a beholder. How do you know it wasn't a gaseous?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And
one of the things I always like to think about when he comes to detective or whatever is that, Isaac Asimov, if you say, what kind of a writer was he, everybody will say science fiction. But if you asked him, if you read, what he said about himself, he thought of himself as a detective writer. He liked to write mysteries.
Well, because at the end of the day, almost there's the same impulse of what's going to happen in any kind of fiction, right?
Yeah.
And role playing is the one thing where you can go find out. And if you don't like what somebody else would have told you happened, you can go make up your own thing that happened, right? And a mystery is the ultimate, thing where they take you into the room at the very end, and it was obviously, Professor Plum and with the ashtray and but I mean, even a romance, I mean, who's going to end up with who? Is he going to get the girl, or is she going to get the guy, or whatever? It's all it's a mystery, and so they're all kind of the same. And science fiction just layers on ideas, on top of it, and they have different focuses.
One of the interesting things I thought as I was going, so like I said, my background is largely horror. I write horror games, and while I'm digging through this and I'm sort of rebuilding the history, I talked to some other designers while I was doing this. And the thing that I kept coming back to is like, you missed the beginning of X-Files by about this much.
Seriously. Here's the deal. I mean, when did X-Files came out? It came out like 91,
92.
Yeah. So it was after we had finished the comics. But that is, I mean, you have to understand, and I don't think any of you guys are as elderly as I am, and I feel it today as much. But
we all got gray.
What?
I said we're all gray, it looks like.
I mean, X-Files was one of these things you woke up. I mean, that anybody that woke up to the world of, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and the FBI and Kolchak the Night Stalker and Roy Finnis and the Invaders. And and you had Chariot of the Gods, and I mean, you threw all those things into in the prisoner. You threw all that into an osterizer, and you end up with X-Files.
That's
right.
right.
I mean, it was a perfect, synthesis of all of it.
Well, and the R.I.P. game, as it was sort of developing within the comics and reading between the lines, it was very much like, you got your top secret SI base, you got your Agent 13 flavoring on top, and then you've got this other sprinkling of horror that you put in. It's like, well, this was Conspiracy X,
Yep.
the game from Eden Studios, before that game happened. And I was actually talking to the line developer of Conspiracy X for Eden about this a while back, and he's like, "Yeah, it would have been."
Conspiracy X. I never played that.
I don't know
it?
either.
Yeah, that's a Unisystem game from Eden Studios. They did the same. I worked at Eden for a bit, so while they were doing Conspiracy X, I was doing a Victorian horror game.
Right.
And the lead designer on that and we were always just trading ideas back and forth.
So was Conspiracy X a modern setting?
It was it was modern setting. You worked for a group called Aegis, and you investigated paranormal stuff. And when I put together what I was doing for this, I'm like, well, hell, I could put together there's Orion in Top Secret, so I created one called Artemis, and it's people who investigate all of this paranormal stuff.
And what was that? That was Uncle, right? Man.
Yeah,
Uncle.
exactly.
Okay. I mean, and all layered on top of that, I forgot about was all the, Kennedy assassination conspiracies.
Right.
And that obviously was
you were just missing the paranoia that entered into the 90s.
Yeah.
I mean, there were bits and pieces of that. What's the name? Remember, Steve Jackson had come out with Hacker and Illuminati.
Yep.
And we had Agent 13. We had the Brotherhood, which was sort of it wasn't exactly like Thrush, and it was an ancient, society that, was communicating with things in the earth and all that stuff made it into a long-running ARG I did, much more recently for a game called Ingress.
What's an ARG?
That was our first game at Niantic.
Yeah, that was before. Okay. That was the predecessor to Pokemon Go.
Correct. Yes, yeah. And we look at Pokemon Go as kind of a mod on top of Ingress.
Yeah.
Ingress! Holy crap!
Yeah. We played the hell out of that.
So Ingress. Oh, so you were involved in Ingress?
Yeah, I was creatively to Niantic for
because Jason and anyone who knows me and Jason and our crew, Mike Kafis, right? So Mike Kafis was super into Ingress. I remember we were at Dragon Con. And he kept walking around. He's like, "Oh, there's a really good hub or something."
Yeah, good portal is
good portal. Yeah, there's a really good portal here.
Yeah,
and he was. It was a couple of times because we were there as guests. I was doing the show Mythwits, and so we had we had obligations and stuff. And he's running around. I'm like, dude, I don't care about your portal. We got shit to do. He's like, no, wait, just 5 more minutes.
Oh, that was he was probably resonating a portal at the thing, which would have been a very big deal in that world. Yeah. And he would have had to, get together 5, players.
And Gen Con 2016, the whole family and I used to go. I take both my kids, my wife, and like I said, it's Gen Con 2016. There's all this great stuff. We're downtown Indianapolis. What are the 4 of us doing? We're running around like a bunch of idiots with our Pokemon Go.
Because Pokemon was the ultimate. I mean, I never understood Pokemon because I came in this window after I did kid stuff and before I had kids. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure my kids played Pokemon games, but I mean, it wasn't. It was just in a hole in my knowledge. But what I did know was that their big thing was catching a Pokemon. Right. And I thought that was just a great marketing line, because I've been working on the Hasbro shows, right? For instead of sounding like a spoiled brat, hey, buy me a Pokemon. Let's go catch a Pokemon. Well, you can only catch them in a store with bait as money is bait. But nevertheless, and so the fantasy of the game where you could actually walk in the real world and catch a Pokemon was a brilliant use. Ingress, we had a different issue because it was our we were inside of Google at that point. Niantic started inside of Google because John Hankey created Google Earth and then wanted to do games.
Oh, okay.
So that's why. Yeah, okay, never mind. It's all clicking together.
Yeah, it was the Geo team. You know, it was
right.
just a game that came out of the Geo team, and he wanted to go leave to do games. And he told Larry Page, "Hey, I know we don't do games here." And Larry Page said, "We do now." You know, so we were airlocked inside the ingress, inside of Google. So we had to get through dog fooding. And I realized very quickly you had to, do a game for people 160 IQs to even get to be released. So that was, that's what that game was. It was a very complex story. It was an endlessly Mandelbrot geometric game,
And for people who are not in the tech world, dog fooding is the moment when you actually have to use your own product. You have to eat
exactly. You have to eat your own product. Yeah, and so we had to get it past people, and we're trying to make a social game. These aren't particularly social people. There's coders that work and 23 and a half hours a day and all that. So we jam the social stuff through the ceiling. It's every kind of game dependency and frat house trick we knew. And I knew when that hit real people, it was something was going to happen.
It reminds me of that line from the IT crowd when Moss tries to explain what D&D is to somebody, and she says, "So is it a sex thing?" Very much the opposite, Jen.
Yes. Yeah, right. No, that would be D&D. They didn't use that phrase D&D. Anyway, whatever that is, some kind of bondage. But anyway, yeah. So I'm trying to think of what else I can tell you. But yeah, all this stuff was the same flesh. And I guess to solve the mystery story of what the R.I.P. game would have been or could be, because a lot of that, it's all the components are there.
Right.
It's just a matter of putting them together. I mean, you start with a basic game system, and I told Jay I would not say anything about our new game, but talk to Jay about the new game. But it's, I never stray far from just pretty much everything you see on my resume all gets thrown into one thing, and that's the new game. Because you get monsters and I just viewed all these genres as fungible. All the way back in the 80s. One day I was running G.I. Joe and Transformers at the same time, but it was while I was working with Gary on these Sagard books we did, which were totally inadvertently, unwittingly kind of like, if you squint and look at it, they were a little bit like Thundar. But interesting, working with the two creators of Thundar, I never knew what the show was because it was, by the time I got there, it was off the air and I just heard about it. But, ultimately Sagard's world was a later version of Earth, and you would find we never explicitly said it, but if you read between the lines, you were walking around the ruins of our civilization that had then been monsterfied, magicified, which was before I did Visionaries, which was all about this world where technology stopped working and magic started working. So now you just take all that stuff and throw it together.
That's a very Jack Vance approach, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, but all that, because think about it. That was that was Gary's, what he, for him it was Robert E. Howard and Jack Vance. I think for D&D. It wasn't. Everybody thought it was Tolkien, and it wasn't. No. And not to mention Bible and everything. I mean, Gary was extraordinarily well versed in ancient history, and
Yeah, if it had been Tolkien, the magic system wouldn't have been anything
no,
like it was. It was
the
reason they call it a Vancian magic system.
The fact that it didn't come from Tolkien is the thing that allowed it not to get trapped in Tolkien.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because Robert E. Howard did a lot broader stuff, and he was like, nobody knows about it, but okay, they know that he and H.P. Lovecraft were pen pals, right?
Right.
If you actually read their correspondences, Howard was saying, I went down to the Brownsville or whatever the town near Cross Plains.
Mm-hmm.
To tie this whole world together in an alternate world kind of way. John Hankey, who's the guy that created Google Maps and Niantic, was born in Cross Plains, and his mother ran the Robert E. Howard Museum, which was Robert E. Howard's house. How's that for a small world?
Wow.
Yeah. And so we used to go to Robert E. Howard days in Cross Plains every summer.
Oh, wow.
And I'm reading all these letters between Lovecraft and Howard. And what's interesting about it is Howard was, not a particularly, humorous character. Lovecraft was. Okay, so Howard's saying, well, yeah, I went to the Brownsville Library and I could find nothing about this Cthulhu mythos you're talking about. Where would this be? And Lovecraft was like, this is a bunch of crap. I made it up.
Yeah.
But what's his name? Who's the other writer that wrote Cthulhu stories at the same time? It was their friend.
I don't know.
Not Clark Ashton Smith.
It was Clark Ashton Smith, whose
Okay.
Cthulhu stories and horror stories are excellent. I mean, what's weird? So Howard actually wrote Cthulhu stories, and they were actually that's telling me I have to go to a birthday dinner, and I got like 10 minutes, so I'll stop talking. But Howard actually wrote Cthulhu stories that are worth reading just for having them, because they're great horror. I mean, Howard is a great horror writer. You think of him as Conan and Cull and stuff like that. He wrote detective novels that weren't that wasn't his genre, but he was trying his hand because he was a pulp writer.
He was a journeyman.
Yeah, an incredibly broad range of stuff, and probably would have been the best screenwriter in Hollywood if he hadn't smoked the pistol and had gone west.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
Well, that's my theory.
So in the about less than 10 minutes that we have with
Sorry
you,
about that. Yeah, I can come back.
Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good to have a little pressure.
69 expiration date or anything.
Yeah. So Tim,
I know.
why don't we let you take over to anything you want to ask Flint based around the stuff that you've been writing about?
Sure. So, like I said, with everything that I have here in front of me, I was able to piece together a fairly, I could piece together a good introductory game, and I could probably fill in the blanks with bits and pieces from other games, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted something that was pure, and I was actually able to generate a character that would probably work in this R.I.P. world. The one thing that I don't really have a good grip on was anything beyond what's in front of me ever written for it, other than what I have in the comics.
I believe we did 1 year of comic modules.
Right, I have those.
Okay, and some of them bled into it. Like you want to see X-Files? It is 13 Assassin, which Roger Slifer, if you ever knew Roger Slifer, wrote as a modern day Agent 13, which got damn close to X-Files. Speaking of our earlier conversation, so that's stuff to to look at. Then we had another one that was called Intruder. And I think Christy Marks did a Smithville, but it wasn't really horror, but it was very much of that world where everybody everybody in it was like one of the people who'd be in Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yeah,
So,
that's the setting.
Human.
That's the setting for the mini games that you have in here, the zombie game.
No, and then so Chris Smithville was an R.I.P. I couldn't remember if it was an R.I.P. or Intruder.
Right, it was here.
I never understood what Intruder was. That was Steve Grant, and
Sure.
I think it was Scott Herring, and their IQs are too high for me.
Yeah.
So I just sort of let them go with whatever they wanted to do.
So was anything actually written for a game itself? So the ad copy that appeared in the TSR catalogs in the 90s said it was going to be.
I do not believe.
That's what
I was thinking. I'll call Ward and ask. Well, I guess that's not going to happen,
Yeah,
but unless you really can escape from the bounds. But anyway, Jim, if you're out there, ping me and tell me whether anything was written for that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who else? The other person who might. It would not shock me if Warren Spector would know. So I'll try to remember to ask him. I mean, he would be one person who could know. My sister wouldn't know.
Yeah, I'm because I was reading through all this. It seems to me that the idea was being floated as a potential game, but I don't know if anything was actually written. I mean,
I would not be surprised. Okay, I would not be surprised if there was a draft at some point had existed a draft of it, but it would have been top secret, and it's kind of like pick your setting.
Yeah.
I mean, just extract the setting from the comics, or what you would think it would be, and do that. And there would probably be worse things to do than to, somewhere between the Top Secret game and the Agent 13 module.
Right.
So the module was much more, when they wrote it, were much more interested in the 30s of it, which wasn't really what particularly interested me than the monsterification of it. Because you had real monsters come out in the books,
Right.
So Flint, where did Agent 13 come from? What did it start out? Because I'm I'm not old. I don't know if I'm old enough. I'm 54, but anyway, did it start out as novels or did it start out as a game? How did that work out?
What happened was I went to Comic-Con. I would have to guess it was 84, possibly 83, but it's 84 seems right. And, I'm going through and, doing what everybody does. And when you go to Comic-Con the first time, you rebuy your childhood. At least in those days you did. Yeah. But then I started finding these pulp magazines, which, I vaguely knew about. And I found like Operator 5, Secret Agent X, let's see, The Phantom Detective. And I'm reading about this and I love these guys and they're fighting. It's like, it's that genre of, they're a little bit adventurer spy. They're a little bit, they're always dealing with mysterious, sometimes masked villains. It's a genre that's split in half. And half of it went to become paperbacks and hard-boiled detectives and, that kind of stuff. And the other half of the genre went to comic books because it was before comic books, right? Mm-hmm. And, you put a suit on them with a clearly readable, no matter how bad the printing is, logo on the guy's chest, you have a comic book. Right. And then both things got further and further from each other.
Right.
But anyway, I'm reading these things. I was reading them, on the floor, and you could buy them for like $8 then. So I just bought like a box of them and brought them home and said to my friend Dave Marconi, who at that moment was a pretty hot screenwriter, and he later on would write Enemy of the State and Live Free or Die Hard. And,
oh wow! Okay.
The Foreigner. I mean, he's done a lot of stuff. And he was writing Mission Impossible 2 with Oliver Stone, but then Oliver Stone left the project. But he's probably done 30 other things too. And he was living on my floor because at that point he was getting these screenwriting deals and he'd just think about wherever he wanted to go, and then they'd put him up in hotels and all. Hollywood was different. So hey, I want to go to Cannes. I'm going to write the Cannes cover up, and Anyway, so wherever he thought was a cool place to go, he'd make up a story and they'd send him there. And he'd live there for a few months and crash on my place, in between. So I showed him to him. I said, "Is it me or is this stuff really great?" And he's reading it. He got as excited about it as I did. And so we decided, oh, well, let's do, just do it. But we didn't think of it. We didn't say, let's do something that's a cross between Indiana Jones and James Bond. But that was later how we would, pitch it. Mm-hmm. So we came up with it as a movie story, as a movie script. And we went out and pitched it and people thought it was kind of cool. But something happened and I realized there was a slot where we could write the books for TSR. And so, so I said, hey, I talked to my sister and, hey, I want to write, Dave and I want to write some books. So we wrote 3 books, Midnight, let's see, Agent. I'm trying to remember what they're finally called, because that's a really funny thing that happens when you actually write something. Like the title ends up being something totally different than what you thought it was. Oh, but it's like Midnight Avenger, and then the Serpentine Assassins, and the trying to remember the third one. And the third one came in a double agent book. I think where Inspector wrote the other book in it, and that is what I want to put 2, because I noticed some of the pulp first paperbacks they'd have 2 stories in them. I just like doing more than one thing. Yeah, I put game content in a paperback, but nobody thought that was a good idea. So it probably was not. But so there were 3 paperbacks and then a year of the comic modules, then the 2 graphic novels. Right. Yep. And we optioned Agent 13 to Charlize Theron 10 years ago.
Oh.
Development hell.
Was she was working as a producer?
Yeah, she bought it for her production company.
Oh, cool.
It was at Universal. I think her deal was technically with Universal, but I don't even remember. but oh yeah, it was kind of cool because like, hey, this thing just came out of nowhere, and here we are. And we're always talking about doing more stuff, and what the last book never got finished just because a friend of mine who we had assigned to write it, because at that point, I was too busy. I was writing movies by that point and doing the Buck Rogers board game and the Buck Rogers role playing game, and then I was writing the Looney Tunes movie and the Fievel. At that point, I just had hit a point where I couldn't do anything else.
Sounds
the fourth book was never finished, and I've often thought about going back and finishing it because it would just be kind of fun to do, and bringing stuff to life. But
Sure.
So for putting it together, the game, I would look at the stuff and look at the Agent 13 because that's halfway there.
Yeah.
It would be something like whatever the modern version of Top Secret SI would be.
Or that would be Top Secret New World Order, published by Solarian Games. Everybody,
Who are those guys?
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Well, okay. So you just do it. Just say those two genres are the same genre.
Yeah.
Because really, a spy is really just a shapeshifter. I mean, you have all the same character class. That was what Gary and I were always working on. That was another thing I found part of is Gary and I were working on a script called Scepter Seven Souls, and what it was like a multiverse book, but characters moving freely from genre to genre.
Yes, that'd be pretty.
Which was just frankly how our brains work. Okay, in other words, I remember we had one image of a guy. They're having a fight on top of a train, and then the train goes into a tunnel and it comes out and it's a dragon, and the guys are riding on dragons.
Well, it's funny you mention that because
and that made total sense to us.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. The test character that I use the same character when I do these sorts of tests. So that way I have an already good idea about who this person is. I just now need to see how they manifest themselves in this different world. So yeah, it's definitely
and that is exactly what we were doing. Okay, I just got a text from my wife. Ready to go as soon as you're finished.
Okay. All right, Flint.
Well, you know what? I think that makes a pretty good reason for us to wrap up. Let's before you go, Flint.
Sorry about that. It's just
no. It's your birthday. Happy birthday, by the way.
Flint, before you go, you want to let people know anything you want to plug? Any place people should look for you?
No, because I'm doing like 3 game projects right now. One of them is a wine tasting game that's also a hidden identity game. It's like,
cool. I like that.
We did that as a Kickstarter. And so, if you guys want to have a really weird night, we can have a play wine tasting game. But anyway, so I will say, because there's sort of a mystery overlaid on top of it.
Right.
And then, then I'm trying to do one the advanced version is going to be, which is a little in this area, because everything doesn't get that far from role playing, but it's basically Clue, but you commit the crime, but it's set in a winery, right? So it's not as deductive. Somebody actually commits the crime, so you're not just Professor Plum. You actually know you killed somebody, right? So that's one thing, but not really relevant to this. And then the secret project Jay and I are doing, which we can't talk about.
Don't talk about it. He'll yell at me.
Yeah, exactly. And then what's the other one? Another one is just a social game. And pretty much everything I'm interested in right now is paper. Because you can just do that yourself or with a very small group of people. There's another thing, Captain Trademark, which is based on a bunch of developments Paul Dini and I wrote in the 80s, in the day, that I found out. I did a massive clean out of all my files during COVID because I was bored. And I found this thing, and it was at the height of when we were doing every toy show imaginable, and everybody and their pet monkey was coming to us doing it. To hire us to do that. And they had a series, and they had, because he was at Lucasfilm for a lot of that period, and I was at Sunbow and Ruby Spears, and then later Amblin. What?
Paul's one of my favorite people.
Well, okay, so Paul and I came up with this thing. We've been developing it. It is a card game at the moment. I mean, it can obviously be everything, So we'll see what happens with that. But it's that's the project we've had a lot of fun.
Nice.
Well,
Nice.
Flint,
Whoa.
whenever you have something you want to plug, you're always welcome to come back and
Great.
we'll plug
Great. And
away.
if there's a bunch of stuff I've either misanswered or not answered or lied to you, I'm just thinking I'll come back.
This isn't a news show. This is a commentary show. Anything you hear here is opinion by far.
Well, Flint,
We back nothing up.
Well, I mean, what's
Right.
funny is, I mean, just even talking about it tonight, I remember a lot of that stuff because I was looking at, because you do something like 40 years ago, we were doing R.I.P. or 35 years ago at least, or somewhere in that neighborhood, and you remember it gets a little bit hazy, but then you start looking at it and talking about it, then it all comes back.
Comes back, yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the interesting thing about it. I mean,
That's cool.
shockingly quickly, you remember all the people and the associations and all
Fantastic.
that. It would not shock me, and I'll look around because there were files I found, but I didn't go through them. If I come upon an R.I.P. rough draft of a game, but I don't know, what's left of the TSR comics files.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
not.
Well,
But,
Okay.
happy birthday.
yeah, but I
to
own
the
it. If you
person
want
that
to actually just call it R.I.P., we can do that. I got the rights for all the comics modules, and Lorraine sold TSR, so
Oh, sweet.
All right.
that would kind of be kind of fun. It's always a good title for a game.
You hear that, Jason?
We do. Yep. Well, happy birthday to whoever
Yes.
you're going to go birthday partying with.
Fantastic, yes.
Yes.
Just going out
Yeah.
to dinner with some friends.
Thanks.
Celebrate
for
life.
joining-
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you got to do that. Thanks a lot, guys. It's fun.
All right.
It's the most fun thing
Thanks.
I did all
Yeah.
day. I watched that
Awesome.
football game. So what can I tell you? All right.
All right. With that, we'll wrap it up for this week of Tabletop Weekly. Thanks everybody for being with us, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks for having us.